We have goals at Eastern Shore Land Conservancy having to do with land use and land preservation. I mean, some of our goals are we want to see a minimum of 80% of our new development going into our towns and not out on our farmland.
Back in the very early 90s, and we came up with a vision that I think still resonates today, and the language of it is a place where our towns are vibrant and well-defined, which is John's part. Where our farms, forests, and fisheries are thriving, so there's an economic component to our rural landscape, and where
this came together around this concept of a co-location center for conservation nonprofits that could take an old building in a highly threatened part of town, renovate it to be part of the town's economic future, at the same time co-locate the organization so we can all collaborate around the new WIP requirements and work together on implementation of all the various base saving strategies. You know, part of our plan with the Delmarva Oasis is looking at securing, this is the largest contiguous block of prime farmland on the East Coast north of the Carolinas. So it is right here in the middle of where all the people are. And we need to be mindful of protecting that land base for food production. So we found Russ Brinsfield and Peter Brown, who were interested in starting something. They pulled together the founding board of the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy. They raised some money. I was doing some staff support and doing the legal stuff for them, and they advertised for an executive director, and I applied. And it was a dream come true because it was based right down there overlooking Y Island there at Y Research Center. So it was a dream come true, and it really worked out that way over the last 31 years. First of all, Russ Brinsfield was a farmer, big farming family from Dorchester County who'd risen through University of Maryland, got his bachelor's, master's, and PhD at College Park School of Ag, and then was head of the Y Research Center. And Peter Brown, he's one of the planet's biggest thinkers on sustainability, was head of the University of Maryland School of Public Policy at the time. Since then, he left about 20 years ago and went to the McGill School of Public Policy. Between his brain about the need for something on the Eastern Shore and Russ's brain about how you actually get something done, the pragmatism of farmers is their hair was on fire in 1989 about the pace of development on the shore. I mean, farms were getting cut up everywhere, and it didn't make any sense. They would just be getting cut up, not according to any plan. It's just wherever a developer wanted to, the zoning allowed them to do anything they wanted. And there was market. If you had access to Route 50, there was market for people that wanted to get to the shore and commute to the Western Shore. And the locals were just distraught. I remember when we started, it was mostly opportunistic. And we were, in that mode, we were protecting land at a pace that put us in the top 3 or 4 land trusts in the country. And this is even with Montana and Colorado, who have big chunks. We were just protecting so much land. So we did an open space inventory for the whole region, where we looked at all the prime farmland, all the historic values, all the high priority natural resource values. This was before GIS, so we did it on these big boards, one per county, and mylar layers done by hand everywhere. We established some priorities out of there, and it really helped us. It actually, I don't think people were doing much of that at the time in the land trust world, and that effort that we went through led to the Rural Legacy Program, which now is preserved well north of 100,000 acres. When we had a major initiative, like we asked all 6 counties to sign a regional land use agreement in 2000 called Eastern Shore 2010. It committed them to 4 goals that, around growth management, land preservation, regional transportation planning. And we got 6 counties to sign an agreement, but to work together toward common goals. the way we got it done was really Harry and Wayne, the titular Republican and titular Democratic leader from the region, went to every county council meeting with me and, just heard the concerns, heard, the pushback, and worked on the compromises needed to make something like that happen. Well, I remember in Talbot, 92, we put Y House into a conservation easement, and or about 400 acres of it. And at the time, Elizabeth Schiller was 92 and blind, or almost entirely blind, and restricted to the second floor of Y House. I had I think her attorney, Hugh Henry, who was a very prominent attorney, then called me up and said, Miss Schiller would like to speak with you. Can you go out? And so I spent a series of meetings going out to meet with her on the second floor there at Y House. And that place breathes history and Frederick Douglass and Delmarva fox squirrels, and it's an amazing place. So for a 26-year-old, 27-year-old kid to be driving in there in my Ford Ranger, pulling up to the front of that house and going in to speak to her, as Richard and Beverly Tillman call her, Aunt Elizabeth. I mean, we've protected a lot of land in Dorchester, but there's one guy that we're still close with. His name is Rick Abend. The name of his farm is Abendhafen, which is Abend's Haven. And Rick was, in 1990, early 90s still, he was a computer programmer in Baltimore. And not a wealthy guy, but he just loved the Eastern Shore and loved wildlife habitat, loved wildlife. And so he bought initially a really small parcel. And then this is down near Madison. And a lot of that area, for some reason around Madison, near the main road, 16 I guess it is, was parceled. So he started saving his money, just holding tightly to his nickels really, and buying parcel after parcel. And he was, just through his grit, was putting together a pretty major wildlife habitat area down there, and managed it. It was a labor of love for him. Lived out of a trailer there for a while because he was just putting everything back into the land and to buying more land. And he was going to put that in a conservation easement. We erased all the old subdivision lines, and it was just here's a guy that is, it's his life's work to put together. I don't know how big it got to, maybe 200 acres in this little corner of Dorchester County, and he didn't do it through wealth. He did it through sheer determination. And every 5 years we do a strategic plan, and we look at what is the status of our work vis-a-vis and what's the status of the Eastern Shore. And by 2000, it was clear we were running as fast as we could, faster than most, but still losing a lot of our landscape. At that time, Queen Anne's County was still, for some reason, they had a few loopholes in their zoning process, but they'd still have 25 farms at a time at any given moment would be in the subdivision process. They were just churning these rural sprawl subdivisions out. And so we decided then, well, we've got to work. Doing parcel by parcel land protection is not going to save the shore. We started an advocacy program to start trying to influence zoning, and sure enough, by 5 years later, we, in part with our pushing, but in part we had great partners too, but all of our counties went through significant downzonings. It was really amazing. It was a paradigm shift on how development was done, with all of these rural counties going through significant downzonings. It just didn't happen. People don't vote for that in rural areas, and it got through. We realized we've got to make our growth areas magnets for growth to take the pressure off of rural areas, and toward that end, we wanted to make them the best places to live that they possibly could be. So we started doing parks and trails, community gardens in our small towns, and we experimented with some things until really around 2010 we realized we sort of wrapped a bow around that and said we created our Center for Towns, which really focused on towns and led us to like redeveloping the McCord building into the Eastern Shore Conservation Center, the Phillips build at Phillips Factory F in Cambridge into the packing house. So we've started taking on bigger and bigger projects as we got more ambitious about what our towns really need. And gosh, it was a huge, ambitious project for us at that time. Nothing like the packing house, but it was big for us, and really we got it done because everybody pulled together. That building was storied in the history. Well, it was the biggest employer in Talbot County for a very, very long time. To see it rot, basically, in the historic district, you know, people had proposed tearing it down too many times as the only way to really get that site redeveloped. And so it was such a universally applauded concept to redevelop that, and especially to put conservation groups in there, that it just was such an amazing amount of public philanthropic elected official, everybody supported it. You know, one of the things I'm most proud of there that we fought for, but originally it had become a place, after it closed, it had become a place where people went to do drugs and start fires and things like that. And when we bought it, one of the things we wanted to do was make sure there's an alleyway right through it between the steam plant and the main building. We wanted to make sure pedestrians could access between the hill section of Easton and the bottom section of Easton down behind docks and that area, because their families live in both. And you know, the Hill's the oldest free African-American place in the country. It's just, there's a lot of history, and the community is here. And I knew a lot of those families through the Big Brothers program. And so when we were developing it, some folks had pushed us to not allow free access through there. And we were like, we made a compromise that, well, we will, in order to get everyone's support, we'll put a gate up and we will have it there. And if it becomes a problem, we'll close it. As we got near the end of construction, it took about a year longer than we thought. So everyone not everyone, but there was a significant amount of pedestrian foot traffic through that from the hill and the bottom. And by that time, we were checking in with people, and everybody was just excited to have it. Didn't think the pedestrian access was going to lead to, you know, beer drinking in the back or whatever is in people's minds. And so we never put the gate on at all, nor have we ever had to close anything. And we've known about the impacts of climate change and sea level rise for decades. At ESLC, we've been working on it since 2000, running a regional program since 2012. But really by 16, it was clear, there was like 4 out of the 5 previous years were the hottest years on record. So we knew we were in trouble on climate change by that time. And the same thing with species extinctions, the Endangered Species Act and other things that came around after the first Earth Day in 1970 had done amazing things, and mostly the trajectory was good. But by 2015, 2016, the whole concept of a 6th extinction was the terminology being used, but our rate of extinctions of known species was accelerating dramatically. by then. And so here we are as a conservation group patting ourselves on the back for a legacy of protecting a lot of land and doing a lot of good things. And here we are facing with a long-term prospect that it's probably not enough. You know, and in fact, the key things that you were trying to protect here on the Eastern Shore are imminently threatened by external forces. You know, we had mostly been working on internal forces, these external forces. So it caused us to just really, I wouldn't say it's a 52 card pickup kind of situation, but we really got, you know, through strategic planning, we were like, we've got to rethink what we're doing. And scale was important. Not just, we obviously, if you look at the Mason-Dixon line down the middle of Delmarva, that's not, a lot of the rivers from Delaware Bay and the rivers from Chesapeake Bay intersect like that. And of course, the Mason-Dixon, the line between the two states runs down, but we have headwaters in Delaware, they have headwaters in Maryland. Ecologically, the political boundaries don't make sense here. So we knew we had to think bigger from a regional ecological unit standpoint. And the real concept of Delmarva Oasis is we've got to build out this network of corridors of habitat and connective tissue or connective, well, we call them hubs of habitat and connective corridors of habitat between those, so that as seas rise and as temperatures change, our species, whether they're insects or microbes or plants or animals, they have an ability to migrate through suitable habitat over time so we can keep them alive. Like right now, our salt marsh sparrows is going to be listed on the endangered species list soon. And this is a species that, 20 years ago, we'd go down to Hooper's Island, the place was lousy with them. And just in that short period of time, the sea level has risen so much that our salt marsh habitat is endangered. And rails too, in my lifetime at the ESLC, we're watching the end of much of our rail populations, which are marsh birds that are very secretive. So bringing that all together, and then with the challenge from Tony Hiss, he had been thinking about this half-Earth concept that was sweeping the globe and proposed we should try a half-Earth concept here. So we did, and we've put a goal out there to protect 50% of Delmarva by 2030. We do have great partnerships with Delaware and Maryland. We have work to do in Virginia. Some money has already started to flow. We've gotten about $6 or $7 new million this year just for the Delmarva Oasis. We have a long way to go from there, but we have confidence, might be too strong a word, but I think learned optimism, I think is fair. We think we can get there from here. Now, this is another 750,000 acres we have to protect. But the region's already 30% protected. We're striving for 50%. The Biden administration's pushing for 30% of America to get protected. Most of the global scientific community's pushing for 50% of the planet to get protected by 2050. There's a lot of momentum. We see ourselves as being out at the tip of the spear on these initiatives. There's a few others around that are really getting traction, but we see ourselves as being a leader there, and we really, more than anything, it's time to change. I've always, going back 6 or 7 years, I told Eastern Shore Land Conservancy leadership that when I get my daughter's college paid for, it'll be time to change. And that's happened, and it's time. We have a very ambitious initiative ahead of ESLC. We got a 9-year sprint to get this done. And the skill set that initiative needs is different than my skill set. There's nothing more plain to me than that. My skill set is working with all of these families on the shore and land and really wearing my boots to work. And that's where I have found my joy over the last 30 years. The next 30 years, this person has got to be walking the halls of Congress and the state capitals of the 3 states. That's where it's really going to happen, and that is not my skill set. And so I think it is a really important time for ESLC to really transform itself into a much bigger, much more regional organization with more heft. And I see that happening, and this new CEO will be a big part of that. For me personally, you know, I do need to spend more time with family. My parents are getting to that point, and need to be more helpful there. It's also, my wife is a hard-charging executive director, so having 2 under the same roof with kids still in middle school is a logistical challenge, so we need to let some air out of that balloon there. But there's, you know, just the joy of living. There are things you give up when you work a lot, and my fly rod is one of them. I had a little more than a week in Montana this summer, and I used to have a month in Montana every summer of the 90s, just living out of my truck, trout fishing, and I'm gonna get some of that back. I could